A warm welcome from Dialogues to all those who have come for the talk, to all of you. We have the good fortune to have in our midst a distinguished visitor today. He has served the nation for years in his capacity as a diplomat belonging to the Indian Foreign Services cadre. He was ambassador to Latvia, Kazakhstan and Sweden, much decorated by the governments therein for his contributions. He negotiated for India at the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations. India has benefited immensely from his diplomatic skills in terms of enhanced cooperations and improved relations with countries such as USA, EU, the European Union, Russia, and other countries. He is currently the president of the Institute of Global Studies, New Delhi, and distinguished fellow, Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. Given his experience and credentials, he is a person well suited to talk about the shifting political equations of major powers such as USA, China and India, and to talk about other issues such as pressing issues, in fact, such as the US-China trade war, the sporadic disturbances in the China-India relations and so on. We are keen to know, for instance, what suggestions he has to offer in terms of improving India's relations with neighboring giant China and the other major power, the USA. In fact, his talk title, as you can see, is eloquent enough: India, USA, China in the shifting sands of geopolitics. There are more details, more information pertaining to the talk and pertaining to his rich experiences as a diplomat, his other contributions. He was decorated with the title of Ambassador of Peace and so on. He has served the country in various other capacities as well. I would welcome you to have a look at the Dialogues website. This is a page from the Dialogues website, which is also linked to the Humanities and Social Sciences web page. So I would ask you to request you to have a look at our website to see not just to know more about this talk and our distinguished speaker today, but also to know about the the other upcoming talks that we have scheduled at Dialogues. With this, without much ado, I would sort of request Ambassador Sajjanhar to take the microphone. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Madhumita, for this very generous and gracious introduction. Friends, thank you to Dialogue IIT-GN for this invitation. Thank you, Professor Joshi, Pushpa, thank you for arranging this. Madhumita for the excellent logistic arrangements, all of you for coming here. And of course, to the leadership of Professor Sudhir Jain, the director of this institution, for taking it, bringing it to the heights that it currently is today. So I'm going to be speaking about relations between these three countries, major countries, important countries. I would venture to say some of the most important countries that we have, which are going to really determine what the future of this planet is going to be like. So when I was talking first with Mohan and then with Madhumita, I thought this might be a good subject, because it would in some way also be related to what you are doing, what you are studying, what you are venturing forth. That is the area of technology, and technology features in a very big way as far as equation between these three countries are concerned. Of course, we know that the world is changing at a very fast pace. There is great flux internationally today. It is nothing new. Change has always been there. I think all of us know that in the 7th century BC, the well-known Greek philosopher Heraclitus had said that the only permanent thing in the world is change. So change is nothing new, but the rapid pace at which change is taking place, I think that is what is quite remarkable. And the future relations of these three countries are really going to determine in which direction this change takes place. So what I'm going to do for the next 40-45 minutes, as I discussed with Madhumita, is that I will speak on relations between the bilateral relations between these three countries, and then also maybe look at where the world is going and what we can expect as far as the future is going to be. But before I come to the bilateral relations, let me also identify a few elements in terms of where is the world today, where is it coming from, in a very, very brief way, and then we go across to having a look at what these three countries are doing amongst themselves and with each other. So the first aspect that I would like to underline for your consideration is that there is a great growing perception that the United States and the West particularly is in a state of decline. The political decline, it is thought, started in 2001. We had the unipolar moment when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991. So from 1991 till maybe the 9/11 attacks which took place in 2001, we had the unipolar moment. But after that, the decline of the United States and the West started, politically and in strategic terms, and in economic terms it started in 2007-2008 when we had the international economic and financial crisis. This is of course notwithstanding the fact that the United States continues to be the largest economy, to be the biggest economy in the world. Today, if you were to look at the figures, the GDP of the United States is about $20 trillion. It is growing at, for such a large economy, it is growing at a reasonably healthy pace of about 3 to 4% per annum. As far as its unemployment is concerned, it is the lowest in about 5 years. It's in technology, in military terms, it is again doing extremely well. But all that notwithstanding, it is perceived that its relative strength is going down. Why? Because there is a challenger on the scene, and that challenger is growing. That challenger is China, and China has been growing for the last many years, but in economic terms, not only in economic terms, but also in military terms, in political terms, in its terms of its strategic and global influence and domination, it has been increasing. It has been growing and it has been giving, so to say, a run for the money to the United States. And that I'll speak in somewhat greater detail when I speak about the bilateral relations between these two countries. In addition, what has happened is that so far, China has been following the policy of one of its earlier leaders, Deng Xiaoping, that you bide your time, that you lie low. Over the last 10 years, China has given up on this policy. Now it is ready to assert itself and ready to demand what it considers is its due. So this is another change that we have seen. Again, when I speak about relations between United States and China, I will refer to that. When I speak about relations between India and China, I'll refer to that and give you some instances of that. But the third fact to note is that China is becoming more assertive, and it wants, so to say, its place in the sun to be the numero uno power as far as the world is concerned. The next aspect would be that the presidency of Donald Trump in the United States 2 years ago in January of 2017 has introduced a great deal of uncertainty in the world. It is known that before he became the president, he had no experience of either having been in governance, having been in politics, serious politics really. He was never a congressman in the United States. He was never a senator. He was never a governor. So no previous experience in governance. But it was thought that, when he assumes this power, he will be guided by his advisors, by his counselors, and he was able to select a large number of good people around him. But slowly and gradually, he has let them go. He has got rid of them for whatever reasons. whether it is Secretary of Defense James Mattis, whether it was National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster, whether it was Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and the several more. So while he came with a good set of advisors, but going forward he has given up on that. So in that sense, the uncertainties have increased in terms of not only the conduct of US foreign policy, but in terms of relations between different countries in the world. The second aspect in this would be that President Trump has been very critical and harsh as far as the US alliances with different countries are concerned. And US alliances have been one of its greatest strengths since the Second World War. So we see whether it is Trump's or US equation with NATO or with West Europe or with Japan or Korea or Australia or ASEAN, you name it, all these alliances are under considerable stress. So these are some of the issues that we will need to be mindful of as we look at where we are going forward. Of course, we also see that since the last 2 years, September, or last 4 years, 3.5 years, for instance, from September 2015, when Russia came into the Syrian operational theater, when it entered with its forces, with its army, with its air power, then Russia has also, since its disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991, Russia has also emerged as a very powerful, very potent force. But today the discussion is not on Russia, so I'm not going to be really focusing on it. But for the sake of completeness, I thought I will paint this picture. This is where we stand today. And let us very quickly now look at some of these equations as we are going forward. First, I'll do actually the maximum amount I'm going to devote is to US-China relations. Because the other two, India-China and India-US, we do have a little bit of idea about that. But let me first deal with the US-China relations. So the first point that I would like to make is that China has emerged as the most formidable rival and the most strategic competitor as far as the United States is concerned. United States today is the incumbent, China is the challenger. And under these circumstances, a bitter rivalry between these two powers is not only possible, but very, very probable. And potential for conflict is limitless, although not an absolute given. If we go back just a few years, just about a decade ago, there was a term that had been coined, and the term was Chimerica, which meant China and America acting together and dealing with the problems of the world, dealing with the issues of the world. This was around 2006, and that was in great vogue. Today we don't hear about Chimerica at all. And the reason is because China appears to be in a great hurry to replace United States from its position of dominance and predominant influence as far as the world is concerned. The other aspect to keep in mind is that the Western world and the United States particularly had thought that that when China joined the WTO in 2001, when its level of prosperity started increasing, of course it's opening up, and its economy doing well had started from the end of the 1970s. So 80s and 90s, it was able to register very significant economic growth. So as its economic growth and position improves and gets better, it will become a more responsible stakeholder as far as international affairs is concerned. It had hoped and expected that China would become more of a liberal democracy that all the other countries are, and would be able to make its place in the international system. That hope, that expectation today lies dashed. It has completely been given up by the US administration, particularly by the Trump administration, I think the writing was very, very clear on the wall, even earlier, but it has been Mr. Trump who, after coming to position, has had, should I say, the courage to be able to take very strong action. And I'll come to that because we have been hearing, we have been reading, we have been speaking about the so-called trade war. And let me mention that, it is a very simplistic way of mentioning that the relationship is purely limited to the field of trade. Although trade is a very important component, but it is not all. It is really a battle, a fight for the strategic technological domination of the world. And that is what the battle between the two countries is taking place. And what the United States has felt is that the most effective way to strike at China at this time would be to see where their vulnerabilities lie. So very quickly, because I can see that the time is moving forward, very quickly, let me recount what are some of the issues that Trump, during his election campaign in 2016, he had charged China. What are the problems, what are the difficulties? Number one, it had called China a currency manipulator. Number two, it had said that China is stealing jobs away from the United States. And as a result of that, it has been able to build up all these huge trade surplus as far as the United States is concerned. If we were to look at the trade deficit that the United States has with the world in general over the last few years, 10-15 years, it has been to the tune of about $800 billion every year. Out of that, about $400 billion, that about 50% of it is accounted for by China. So the relationship is hugely skewed in favor of China. Of course, I don't want to go into that right now, but if during question and answer there is some interest, we could speak about it at length, because some analysts and some economists would suggest that the bilateral trade deficit is really of not much significance. What really one has to see is what is the global trade surplus or trade deficit that a country is having. And so the United States needs to be worried about that rather than trying to address only a bilateral trade deficit between the United States and China. What is the in terms of figures, and I don't want to at this hour of the day load you with any heavy figures or data, but it would be useful to keep in mind that today United States, as I said, has the largest GDP of about $20 trillion. China is number 2 with about $12 trillion, and this I'm talking about nominal GDP terms. If we were to look at what are the respective GDPs in purchasing power parity terms, I hope everyone here is aware of the concept of purchasing power parity. Yeah, am I correct? Am I correct or no? Yeah, I can see some nods, but they're not very vigorous nods. So I will explain to you what it means. What it really means is, it is always related to US dollar, in US dollar terms. What it means is that if I have this pair of glasses and I can buy this pair of glasses in the United States, and it's always related to United States because GDP is always calculated in US dollar terms. So if I'm able to buy this pair of glasses in the United States for $100, then for the same $100, how many of these glasses I would be able to buy in, for instance, India or for instance, China. So this is the purchasing power parity, the same amount, how much of the goods and services will it get me in the United States and how much will it get me in the other economy. So if we were to take the purchasing power parity, the GDP of China today is about $23 trillion. So it is about 119% of what the GDP of the United States is. And it surpassed the GDP of the United States in purchasing power parity terms in 2013. Now, if we were to go forward, even in nominal dollar terms, because China its growth has slowed to about 6%. Earlier it used to be 9 or 10%. But going forward, even in nominal dollar terms, it would be able to overtake the GDP of the United States by 2031. That means another 10-12 years, if not earlier. So Chinese GDP is also increasing. But of course, if you were to look at per capita GDP, there's still a huge difference. You know, United States today is about $62,000 per capita GDP, and as far as China is concerned, it is in the range of about 9,000 or so. So there is still a huge gap between the two, but still China is catching up. And as I said, by 2030 or even before that, the GDP of the two countries will be together. So that is where what Mr. Trump said, that this trade deficit between the two countries is quite unsustainable. It was $375 billion in 2017. That means the total trade was in the range of about $600 billion, and China was exporting about $450 billion to the United States or $500 billion, and it was importing about $100 billion. So there was a trade deficit of $375 billion. So what did Mr. Trump do? Last year in 2018, in different tranches, starting from July, he imposed penal tariffs, he imposed additional tariffs on imports coming from China. First on steel, then on aluminium, then on goods worth $16 billion in August, then $34 billion, then in September on $200 billion. Now, as you can see, United States has that capacity to impose these tariffs because they're importing about $500 billion worth of goods. China has capacity, but it is severely limited because it imports only $100 billion. So while the United States imposed on $250 billion imports coming from China, China was able to retaliate only to the tune of $110 billion, which is the total amount of imports that it has from the United States. So out of these, the $200 billion, the tariff that was imposed was 10% in September, with the warning that if a suitable, if an acceptable solution is not found by the 1st of January 2019, these tariffs would be hiked to 25%, as had been the case for the earlier tariffs. Now, there was a meeting, as many of you would know, between Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping at Buenos Aires on the 1st of December. And there they decided, okay, we'll have intense negotiations, and for 3 months there'll be no increase in the tariffs. So from 1st of December till the 1st of March, no increase in tariffs. Very intense negotiations taking place. And on 24th February, again, Mr. Trump announced that the additional 25% will not be imposed till we find a resolution to this dispute going forward. And they say that they have made reasonably decent progress as far as this is concerned. But the problems are much more. What are the problems? I had mentioned about two. One is currency manipulation, the other is job losses. But the real problem is in terms of technology. Because what the United States charges China is that it is inadequately protecting the intellectual property rights from the United States. It is stealing IPRs from the United States. And also the practices that it follows, which is that it will force the US companies which want to invest and which want to do business with China to part with their technology. So forced technology transfers also. So as I told you, it is all really related to technology. And so the challenge now is not only to mechanically deal with the trade deficit, but also see as to how some of the policies that are being followed by China are changed. Here I would very quickly like to mention two particular programs of China that the United States has difficulty with. One of them is known as the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm sure all of you have heard about it. Earlier it was floated in 2013 as the One Belt, One Road Initiative. Then in 2017 there was a conference, a big huge meeting held in Beijing, which was known as the Belt Road Forum. And the basic purpose, although China says that it is for the global good, we are creating connectivity, we are developing infrastructure for development of smaller countries, but basic problem, meaning over the last 2 years, many difficulties have come up with it. This is, there are a number of debt traps that have been seen, whether it is in Sri Lanka, whether it is in Maldives, even Nepal, even Pakistan. There have been issues, Malaysia, there have been issues, that there are what are called predatory financing practices, which means that countries are given loans at very high interest rates, which they are not able to repay. And hence those projects come under the charge, under the control of the Chinese administration or the Chinese government, which has a very adverse impact upon the sovereign decision making of these many countries. So, and the basic objective of BRI is to construct and create a web of these infrastructure and connectivity projects with the exclusion of the United States. So you have Asia, you have Africa, you have Europe. All of these are connected except the United States. So it is to isolate and to exclude United States from this. So this is one project, one initiative that United States has particular difficulty with. The other one is what is known as Made in China 2025. And under that project, what China seeks to do is to have a control, a dominating control over 90% of the world's most sophisticated technologies. And in that context, the state itself is funding the growth of these technologies, whether it is in artificial intelligence, whether it is in robotics, whether it is in different areas. So this is a program also that the United States has particular difficulty with. The conflict, the rivalry between the two countries is on two levels. One is on the level of ideology, both in ideology of governance. We have in the United States a liberal democracy, liberal democratic structure that they seek to promote. In China, we have an entirely opposite and authoritarian centrally controlled system. Also in the area of economics, we have a free market economy here and a centrally controlled planned economy as far as China is concerned. In fact, it's become quite ironic that China, with its web of non-tariff barriers, has really emerged as the messiah and the spokesperson for free trade and globalization, because in contrast to Mr. Trump's America First, it has been going out, the Chinese president has been going out, and it has been promoting the idea of free trade and globalization. So both at the level of ideology as also at the level of raw power, because China, as I said, has become very assertive. What we see in South China Sea, and I'm sure many of us here are aware of what has been happening in that it is an area of about 3.6 million square kilometers. So it's an area the size of which is even more, 10% more than the size of the Indian subcontinent. India is about 3.2 million square kilometers, and China claims 80% of that, that is more than 3 million square kilometers, as its own. It stakes historical claims that 2000 years ago, it used to be a part of Chinese influence. And there have been international bodies which have ruled against the Chinese position, but China has refused to pay any attention whatsoever to that. So this is the situation where we find, as far as relations between US and China are concerned. People might call it a trade war, but it is much more than a trade war. As I said, it is a contest. It is a contestation between these two powers, one incumbent, one challenger for the domination, particularly in the area of technology, as also strategic, political enhancement of their influence. Now, let me quickly come to relations between India and the United States, and I've chosen this US and China because as far as India is concerned, these are the most important bilateral relationships. There are other relations. With Russia, it is important. With Japan, India's relations are important. With Europe, they are important. But these two, in my view, and if there are any comments, I'll be very happy to discuss in the question answer session. These are the two most important relationships. One, the United States, because positively, it is the most fruitful relationship as far as India is concerned. And China, because it is the most formidable challenge that India faces today is from China. If people tell you that it is Pakistan or something else, don't believe them, because it is today, it is China, and it will continue to be China as the most formidable challenge that we have to face. Now, as far as India-US relations, 2 or 3 comments. Number one, that today the relations between the two countries are the best that they have ever been since the Second World War. And they continue to expand, they continue to grow. Of course, if we look at the last 70 years or so, the nadir of the relationship was reached in 1971 during the India-Pakistan war, during the war for liberation of Bangladesh. And that was the time when the United States had sent its nuclear-powered aircraft carrier to the Bay of Bengal to threaten and to intimidate India. And also at that time, now that the archives are available, it had also tried to provoke and incite China to launch a military offensive against India. But none of that succeeded. Bangladesh emerged as an independent country. After that, we come to 1998, when India had the nuclear test, the 5 nuclear tests in May of 1998. The relationship, which was on the mend, took a hit. But after that, in 2000, in March 2000, we had the visit of then President Bill Clinton to India. And after that, the relationship has been continuously on the rise. So since 2000, we have had started with Bill Clinton, who was a Democratic president. For next 8 years, it was George W. Bush, who was a Republican president. After that, Barack Obama, 8 years, Democratic, and now again Republican. So irrespective of which party has been in the White House, irrespective of which party has controlled the US Congress, whether it is the House of Representatives or the Senate, relations with India have continued to grow. Similarly, as far as India is concerned, irrespective of which party has been in power in in Delhi, in the center, the relationship has continued to grow. Again, there we had first we had the BJP led government, NDA government, with the BJP at the lead. From 2000 to 2004, from 2004 to 2014, UPA government with Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then again now NDA government. So irrespective of which government is there, the trajectory has been on the ascendance. In fact, you would remember that when Dr. Manmohan Singh was asked as to what was his biggest achievement in his 10 years as Prime Minister, he identified the India-US nuclear deal as his biggest landmark achievement during that period. So relations have continued to grow. In 2010, when Barack Obama came to India, first visit in his first tenure, he termed the relationship as the defining partnership of the 21st century. But from 2010 to 2014, relations didn't really move forward. They were languishing, they were stagnating for a variety of reasons. Again, if there's interest, I'd be happy to sort of go through that. But since 2014, when Mr. Modi has taken over, the relationship has really started moving forward. To begin with, from September 2014, which was the first visit by Mr. Modi to United States to address the UN General Assembly in September. At that time, he visited Washington, D.C. for a meeting with Barack Obama and the US government. And then soon after that, in January 2015, we had Barack Obama coming here as the chief guest. at India's Republic Day. So Obama became the first US president ever to visit India twice during his tenure, and also the first US president to be invited and participate in India's National Day celebrations as the chief guest. We have had people coming from all over other countries, but never from the United States. Over the 2.5 years, there were 9 meetings between these two leaders. There were 3 summits between these leaders, and that really took the relationship to a much higher level. And when Mr. Modi was invited in June of 2016 to Washington DC, and at that time he also addressed the joint session of the US Congress. And at that time he said that the relationship between India and US is the indispensable partnership. So we see that from mid-1990s, when one US ambassador had written a book, and the title of that book was Estranged Democracies. That means these are 2 democracies, but they are estranged from each other. From that, within 20 years, we have come to a state where it is an indispensable partnership. And what Mr. Modi also mentioned at that time was that India has overcome the hesitations of history. So the relationship is moving forward. Again, when Mr. Trump came, there were all these worries and anxieties that since he's never been in position, how is he going to take forward the relationship? And we can see that although Trump has thrown aboard many of the policy decisions that the Obama administration had taken, whether it was the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, whether it was the Iranian nuclear accord, what is known as the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action to control the ambitions of Iran's nuclear program, or it is Obama's healthcare program, which is known as the Obamacare, or it is the Paris Accord. All these things, these were very significant achievements of the Obama administration over its 8-year period. So it threw away all of them except one, relationship with India. That he has continued to take forward, and there are a large number of instances, but very briefly I'll mention changing of the nomenclature of Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific. When Trump came to Asia in November 2017, instead of the nomenclature that this whole region is known by as Asia Pacific, he changed the nomenclature to Indo-Pacific. So you would be hearing much more reference to Indo-Pacific these days. China, of course, is not very happy, not to say not very happy, it's decidedly unhappy by this change of name. But this was a way of bringing into focus the importance of the Indian Ocean and the role that India can and needs to play in any architecture that evolves. Also, the US Pacific Command that is based in Hawaii, the name of that was changed also to Indo-Pacific Command. There is a meeting that takes place between 4 countries, which are known as the Quad countries, that is India, US, Japan, and China, basically to ensure that there is peace, security, stability in South China Sea. As I mentioned, that is an area of great concern as far as India is concerned, because more than 50% of our maritime trade passes through the South China Sea. So on a number of issues, there is a convergence of interest between the two sides. So as I said, relations have started improving about 18-20 years ago. They have been on an upward trajectory. They are the best they ever were. And today, why do I say that they will continue to improve? Because not only is there a convergence of values, of democratic values, of freedom of speech, expression, religion, media, but also, equally if not more importantly, there is also a convergence of interests. And interests, India needs the United States needs India. India needs the United States for its capital, for its technology, for the strategic support it gets in dealing with China. The United States needs India also as far as its huge market is concerned. Today, United States has become India's second largest supplier of defense equipment. I remember that when I used to be in Washington, D.C. in 2005, and that was the first defense agreement that we signed with the United States. At that time, our defense relationship was absolutely non-existent. Today, we are importing more than $18 billion worth of defense equipment from the United States. And it is not only a buyer-seller relationship, it is also in terms of joint production, joint manufacturing, joint designing of all these programs. So, and of course, in dealing with China, also United States needs India to balance the growth of China. So there are a number of other initiatives, and I don't want to go into any great detail at this juncture, but as I said, if there are any questions, I'll be very happy to respond to those. But there is a 2+2 dialogue that has been set up between the two countries. That is, the foreign minister and the defense minister of the two countries are to meet regularly on an annual basis and take the relationship forward. Now, very quickly, let me come to the India-China relationship, and that, as I said, is the most formidable challenge as far as India is concerned. And while some of the recent developments are very well known, but to give you a holistic picture, 3 or 4 most significant issues as far as India-China ties are concerned. Number one is, what are the areas of difference? And I don't want to go into smaller issues of stapled visas and so on and so forth. But the 3 issues that I will identify. Number one is, I know 10 minutes exactly, I'm quite conscious of that. That's why I've been looking at my watch also. So the 3 issues are that I would identify is, one is the 4,000-kilometer long border between India and China. That is still unsettled, still disputed. I'm sure this is a very erudite audience, so you would know, but let me still repeat that China has land boundaries with 14 countries. It has settled boundaries with 12 countries. And only 2 countries remain with which the land boundaries have not been settled, because it says it does not recognize the McMahon Line. But the same McMahon Line has been recognized by it when it has settled its borders with Myanmar. So which are the 2 countries with the borders have not been settled? India and anyone? Taiwan. It doesn't have a land boundary with Taiwan. It has a maritime, sorry? Bhutan, okay. So India and Bhutan, basically to use that as a pressure point, and we saw, all of us saw the, are aware of the Doklam confrontation, eyeball to eyeball confrontation that took place in 2017. So it refuses to settle that border because it wants to use that as a pressure point, and as the inequality in power increases, because today if you look at India's GDP, it is about $2.8, $2.9 trillion. And if we were to look at China, that is about $12 trillion. So it is about 4-5 times more. And that gap is increasing. Although India has done well, it is about 7%. It is the fastest growing major economy in the world. But still, it's 7.5, 8% growth on a base of $3 trillion is an amount that is much less than a 6% growth on a $12 trillion base. So this gap between the 2 countries is increasing. But if you were to project it, let us say much further to 2050, 2100, then of course India comes very close to bridging this gap with China. So first is the border issue. The second is in terms of the help that it provides to Pakistan, whether it is in terms of diplomatic support, strategic support, United Nations, military support, and more recently in terms of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which under the Belt and Road Initiative, it has been funding and financing. So it has put in about, or will put in, a total of about $62 billion into Pakistan, and Pakistan will be in no position to repay that money, that amount, because it will not be able to generate those sort of returns, which means that Pakistan will willy-nilly become a client state as far as China is concerned. Many countries, particularly the new leader of Malaysia, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, he has called the BRI as a form of neo-colonialism, because it is lending money and enhancing, ensuring that you maintain your strategic influence over those particular countries, as was happening in the case of Maldives, as was happening in the case of Sri Lanka. The third aspect is the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Tibet question, as far as India and China are concerned. So India, of course, considers His Holiness as a revered religious leader who is not allowed to carry out any political activities in India, while China considers His Holiness, they term him to be a splittist and a liar who is out there to break China. So these are the three major issues between the two countries. Of course, the two countries started out quite well when Mr. Modi came to power in 2014. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, was the guest, and he was in your city in September 2014, and I think those images we keep on seeing in on television channels very frequently. But it started off well in the sense that Mr. Modi went out of the way to reach out to China, but the whole impact of that visit was marred by the incursion by Chinese troops into Indian territory in the northern sector. And you would recall, some of you would recall that during the press briefing in Delhi at the end of September 2014, visibly upset Mr. Modi had, so to say, warned President Xi Jinping that the two countries will not be able to realize the full potential of their partnership if the border was not tranquil and peaceful. So from 2014 till 2017, we had a peaceful, stable, secure border till we had the Doklam in June of 2017. The confrontation lasted for 73 days. And I would conjecture that it took place because China was quite unprepared for what India did, and it had already tasted a success, so to say, in the South China Sea by claiming all these very many islands there, reclaiming, constructing new islands and militarizing them. And there had been no opposition, not from US, not from Japan, not from ASEAN. So I thought it would definitely not be able to have any opposition from any of the parties. So it was taken by surprise. And that is why, in my view, we had these very venomous and vicious and abusive comments coming from the Chinese media and even the Chinese leadership when the Doklam issue was going on. But after Doklam, there have been other issues. We have India's membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and China has been putting obstacles. India's membership of the UN Security Council, China has been putting obstacles. And of course, the four-time veto technical hold on designation of the Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist leader Masood Azhar in the United Nations. So all these issues have been there, of course, to deal with the current, with the low in the bilateral relations that took place as a result of Doklam. The two leaders met in Wuhan, one of the cities in China, for an informal summit. And they tried to basically, what they said was, let us enhance, let us increase the strategic engagement between the two countries. And both the countries have tried in some way to deal with, so that not to be provocative as far as other countries are concerned. But I feel that it has not really started yielding much results, because the first litmus test, in my view, was the designation of Masood Azhar, and if China had relented on that, that would have been some demonstration that there has been a change of heart. But nothing of that seems to have happened. Now the second Belt and Road Summit is going to take place in Beijing by the end of this month. India is not going to participate again. So I think it is there are very many pious words that have been mentioned in the Wuhan document, but the results are really not visible on the ground. So this contestation and this competition between India and China will continue. India-US relationship will be a means of trying to balance China in a positive direction, and the contestation between the US and China will also, I think there are no easy solutions. So in the end, what does India need to do? As far as, that was one of the questions that Madhumita, you had posed at the beginning. One is to focus on enhancing, on increasing our own national comprehensive strength. And that can be done basically in terms of ensuring that our economy continues to grow. Now it is 7.5%. Our policymakers, decision makers, economists have said it can grow at 8%, 9%, to ensure that that growth takes place, to ensure that that growth is inclusive, so that we have been dealing with the issue of poverty in a very effective manner. If you look at some of the World Bank reports that have come out from 1994 till about 2017, and every year we have brought down the poverty at about 1.5% per annum. So what it used to be 44%, again it depends upon how you define poverty levels, but for this purpose it was defined as US dollar 1.90 per day. So from 44% it came down to about 4 or 3%. But still we see that there is considerable poverty, there are pockets of poverty we need to. So in terms of the economic strength, we need to enhance, we need to make India stronger. And number two, we need to build our alliances. And our alliances, I can say that over the last 4 or 5 years particularly, we have been particularly successful, whether our relations with US, with Japan, with Europe, with Russia, with West Asia. I think we have the best ever relations with countries in West Asia, whether it is Israel or Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates. And I think one instance, one demonstration or testimony of that is that over the last few weeks or months, we have seen many of these countries giving their highest awards to India and to Prime Minister Modi, whether it was Russia, which gave its highest award just a few days ago, or the United Arab Emirates, which gave the award, Sheikh Zayed Award to Prime Minister Modi. So this is evidence of the strength of the bilateral relationship. So let me finish here. As I said, I'll take about 45 odd minutes. That is what I have taken. So the floor is yours. Any questions, any comments? I'll be very happy to respond to the best, in the best possible way that I can. Thank you very much.